Hello, dear participants. Good morning. Um, I want to crave your indulgence to allow more members to come on board. So we will start our class at exactly 8:15. Thank you for your understanding. Good morning, everyone. I sincerely want to welcome us to another session, and may I implore every one of us to please mute your mic if you're not speaking. This is one of the etiquettes of online learning. I had to take away the right to unmute because I realized that many joined without their mics muted and they were creating so much noise on the platform. So may I please implore every one of us to please mute. As long as you're not speaking, you remain muted. Okay, so we will start our session for today. All right. Last week, we had an interesting session, and that was the beginning of our study for the current academic session, and we did explore the foundation of economics. We looked at interesting issues such as why microeconomics is an important subject for every one of us, irrespective of our faculty. Yeah. We also looked at the differences between positive and normative economic analysis, and we rounded off the class by simply enlightening ourselves on why it is important that we take the study of microeconomics serious. So today, God willing, we are taking one step forward by looking at the concept of production and trade. Interestingly, prior to our independence, production has been a part of the Nigerian economy, and we took pride in producing cash agricultural products. We also participated in active manufacturing, which actually formed the basis for industrialization in Nigeria, and Nigeria witnessed several forms of forward and backward integration. Not only that, we also had the access to natural resources, which increased Nigeria's potential in trading activities between nations and other nations across the world. But suddenly, we got it wrong. And this was when we actually started prioritizing consumption ahead of production. We thought that adopting the structural adjustment program would turn the tide in favor of production, thinking that when we liberalize the economy, private sector agents will be motivated to invest in our economy and thereby fostering sustainable growth and development. Unfortunately, here we are today. Nigeria is at its low level. We are witnessing several uh, socio-political, economic, cultural shocks, and we are all begging for solution. Interestingly, interestingly, one important debate that has not been reiterated enough is the need for us to go back to production. So, in today's session, we would justify why every one of us should take pride in production. And that is where we are starting today. So, for our discussion of production and trade, we have four important subsections that we are actually going to look at. The production possibility frontier, the concept of comparative advantage, specializations, and gains from trade. Types of trade, as well as trade restriction. So for the purpose of our learning today, our emphasis would only be on production possibility frontier. So we would start with the concept of production. What is production? What is required for us to be able to engage in production? And finally, what is the economic importance of the production possibility frontier? So the remaining concepts, comparative advantage, specialization, and gains from trade, terms of trade, and trade restrictions are all encompassing. And we would treat this next week under the concept of trade. So at the end of today's session, you are expected to be able to define the concept of production. You are expected to explain the importance of resources, the types of resources, and the concept of ownership of resources. And finally, you are expected to be able to provide analytical explanations around the concept of production possibility frontier. Look at this picture, dear participants. Tell me what comes to your mind. Please drop your comments on the chat box because I have retrieved the right for you to unmute. Please drop your comments on the chat box and I will read it out. What comes to your mind? Look at the picture. Okay. Water, tap, a leaking tap, a leaking tap, dryness, okay. Scarcity, Lawrence. Yes, it's a tap water, sir. Okay. Abolade say it's a tap water. Yes, a leaking tap. Yes, a leaking tap. Scarcity of water. Yes, scarcity. Tiny drops of water. An old tap. Fantastic. Scarcity of water. Fantastic. Scarcity of water. A drop of water. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Scarcity. Okay. Ah, quite interesting. Quite interesting. So, many of you, interestingly, may not experience this very feature. Okay. We saw it firsthand while I was growing up, particularly when I was in the boarding school. And you would wait for several hours, believing that the public water will flow. So at the end of the day, this is what we experience. The water comes, and just after about 10 or 15 minutes, it goes and you begin to experience what you have here. So the secondary school I went to eventually had to devise a means of providing for our immediate needs of water by constructing reservoirs around the hostel, and the school invested in water tanker. So they had to go out of the school premises to buy water and supply into all the reservoirs on campus. I mean, on within the school premises. So for those of us who actually said little drops of water, yes, you have an idea. Is that okay? Little drops of water. And what this simply means is that it connotes scarcity. Is that okay? It simply means the water is relatively scarce. So this is one important concept in economics that we cannot overlook, given the fact that resources are at our disposal, but they are relatively scarce. In other words, when you take into consideration the resources that are available to us, they are hardly enough. And the good thing is that for those of us here in this part of the world, you realize that the rate of our population growth is faster than the rate at which we are producing, or the rate at which our economy is growing. And what this means is that we have competing needs for consumption and for production. And since whether we like it or not, as humans, we will always want to eat to survive. Hence, many of us prioritize the use of our available resources, especially the financial resources, for consumption instead of production. So look at what you have here. What comes to your mind? What comes to your mind? Looking at this gentleman, and he has 6 doors ahead of him, and is expected to just pick only one door in order to achieve his goal. The door he picks will determine where he will go. So you can imagine if you, as a Jambite, you are asked to ballot that, oh, all these 6 doors carries no except one, which says yes. So if you pick a yes, you are going to be offered accommodation on campus. And should you open the door that has no, then it means that you will forfeit that accommodation. At this point in time, you do not turn back because you have to make a choice. Some of us will always play the mini game then by singing mini, mini, mani, mo. Father has a donkey, donkey die, father die, mini, mini, mani, mo. Then you pick, you know. But when it comes to economics, economics does not joke around with mini, mini, mani, mo. Okay? But there will always be options for you to choose, either in the form of policy tools or in the forms of policy implementation or in the form of economic decisions to be made, etc. So whether we like it or not, as rational beings, every day choices are made. Every day, choices are made. And that is why, whether we like it or not, whether we like it or not, you must always have competing needs. And these competing needs will force you to make a choice. Now, according to Lipsy and Crystal, 2011, they said that economics is concerned with the problems of choice under conditions of what? Scarcity. Time, which is available to every one of us, is also relatively scarce because it is one of the important resource that God has endowed us with. And look at 8 to 10 this morning. 8 to 10 this morning. Is that okay? I could have chosen to go to the library to do a quick mental sum for this morning. I could have gone to the School of Postgraduate Studies to resolve some of the pending result issues that I have. I could have also called a friend who is in the private sector that I'm coming to his office to conclude our discussion on his contribution to student development in Unilag. But one thing that is a constraint for me is time. I have just 2 hours, 8 to 10. I need to go to the library. I will need to go to PG school. I need to come for a ECN232 class. I need to visit a friend in town to discuss business. 4 competing needs or wants. 4 competing wants. And I have just 2 hours because by 11, I have another meeting on campus. So this is me standing. The first door, go to PG school. The second door, go to the library. The third door, attend ECN232 class. The fourth door, visit a friend to discuss business. The fifth door, should I take my car to the mechanic? The sixth door, oh, I remember, I need to buy fuel. And now MRS just by the gate has called me that they are open for business. What should I do? Economics is concerned with the problems of choice under conditions of scarcity. So, do you have everything that you want? That's a question to you this morning. Do you have everything that you want? Oh, some as Zainab says no. Blessing says no. Adeogun says no. Mary says no. So, why is that so? Is there anything you wanted this week and that you still do not have? Is there anything that you wanted this week? Excellence said yes. Oluwatosin said yes. So what is that thing that you want and yet you still do not have? Can you please drop it on the slide on the chat box? What is that thing that you want and you still do not have? Legally said money. Wow. Let's hear from others. Oriofe, what is that thing that you want and yet you still do not have? Money. Adewale said a Samsung phone. Emmanuel says a power bank. Yusuf says a laptop. Amma says a laptop. Oriofe says $1 million. Simisola said a job that pays in pounds. Quite interesting. Feyiyemi says she wants a private jet. Bakari says money and online job. Manua Blessing says a laptop. You can see that the list goes on and on. A Dodger says an internship program. What does this tell you? There is scarcity of resources. If resources at our disposal were not scarce, everyone would have access to whatever they want. But because resources available are relatively scarce, you have to make a choice amongst existing and competing wants. So, what are resources? What are resources? Resources can simply be defined as the basic elements required to satisfy our wants, whether in the immediate term, whether in the short term, over the medium term, or in the long term. And these resources comes in different forms, in diverse forms. Just as I have displayed on the screen, resources include natural resources, human resources, capital resources, and entrepreneurial resources. The list can still go on depending on the perspective of the economy or the player or the stakeholder. And just as you can see, examples of each have been provided. If I'm going to take us back to our freshman days, this is also known as factors of production, where natural resources is totally covered as land, human resources is covered as labor, capital resources is covered as capital, and entrepreneurial resources is classified as entrepreneur. Remember, we often say that there are four factors of production: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur. And for each type of these resources, there are various sub-resources that you can mention. And all of this varies depending on the industry in which you have found yourself or in which the company is operating or the firm is operating. Ownership of resources. All the resources that we have mentioned in the previous slide, whether it is natural, human, capital, or entrepreneurial, belongs to somebody, belongs to a community, belongs to a state. It could even belong to a group of people, depending on the framework of ownership that exists within that given economic space. So two things that characterizes ownership are control and the legal rights. Let me give you a very good example. How many of us know the Lekki Link Bridge? How many of us know the Lekki Link Bridge? And under whose administration was the Lekki Link Bridge constructed? Please drop your answer on the chat box. If you know the Lekki Link Bridge, in which state is the Lekki Link Bridge situated? Who was the governor when the bridge was constructed, completed, and launched? Thank you, Bakari, Lagos State. So who was the governor then? Thank you, Zainab. Yes, Lagos State. Yes, Samuel says Fashola. Okay, yes, Governor Fashola was the governor then. Raji Fashola was the governor then. Now, the ruling party in the country, which party was ruling the country then? Which party was ruling the country then? Oriofe says APC. Zainab says APC. Ganil says APC. Okay. Ayomide says PDP. Well, Ayomide, Bakare, and Isiaka got it. The ruling party in the country then was PDP. Okay. And that is why people felt that APC was only controlling selected states in the southwest. Now, when that bridge was going to be constructed, there was some debate over the ownership of that water, that the lagoon across which the bridge is constructed. And that was when Musiliu Obanikoro was an active PDP member, and he held a ministerial position then. That was when he became a minister of the Federal Republic of Nigeria before he was moved to, I think, Ghana as an ambassador. And when the tussle started, the federal government, which is a PDP, and the state government, which is APC, had were at loggerheads over the ownership of resources. The lagoon, in this case, was considered an important resource. And the federal government argued that even though that lagoon is situated inside Lagos State, the federal government controls all water bodies in the country. Hence, Governor Raji Fashola cannot construct that Lekki Bridge, Lekki Link Bridge, except if it secures the right authorization from the federal government. I'm just trying to paint this picture for you to understand the concept of ownership of resources. I'm sure many of us too would have witnessed rancor between two landlords, particularly potential landlords, particularly over the tussle of who owns the plot or two or land, where an agent chooses to be greedy and sells the same plot of land for two or more people. So the question beckons, who owns the land? So that ownership cascades down into two legs. Who controls it? That is number one. So if you control it and you do not have the legal right, you cannot claim ownership. And this is why we have an interesting concept called the land grabbers. Land grabbers have control because they have all the necessary tools to oppress the innocents. However, they do not have the legal right over the land. He or she who possesses the C of O, the certificate of occupancy, can claim the right over a particular plot of land. And that's why when two people come forward to say, this land belongs to me, yes, we know that depending on the resources at your disposal, you can control. But what determines the real and substantive owner of that land is that person who has been able to secure the C of O for that plot of land. So ownership requires one, control, and two, you must have the legal right. You must also have the legal right. Okay? So ownership comes in diverse forms. Ownership of resources comes in diverse forms. It can be public ownership. In this case, the state is the owner of the resources. It can be private ownership, where individuals such as you and I can claim ownership. You have the control and you have the legal right. Let me give you a good example here. University of Lagos has decided that you all will be coming to school next year to write your exam in person. So even though we're having our lectures online, when it is time to write the exam, you probably have to come to school. I have over 700 students from Faculty of Management Sciences, and everybody would write a CBT exam. So in other words, you're going to have access to a laptop or a desktop for you to write your exam. Who owns the laptop? Who controls the facility? And who has the legal right over that facility? University of Lagos. None of you here on this call this morning can actually claim and say that once I get to DLI, I have a particular laptop that I'm going to use. Nobody dares touch that laptop except me. People will laugh at you that look at this joker. Now your papa get am, as we usually say in our Nigerian way, because it belongs to all the facilities belong to University of Lagos. And every student who has paid his or her school fees, has a matriculation number, belongs to a specific department, and we can identify with that student has a right to use it. It is not exclusive to anybody. That is public ownership. Private ownership, in other words, that very resources belongs to an individual or a private economic agent, as in either a firm or a company, which people can now subscribe to. An example that I can put on the table for every one of us this morning is the Women's Society Hostel or the El Kanemi Hostel on campus. Even though the other hostels that enjoys bigger patronage, that are publicly controlled and managed, are not ready for use. Many of you that are smart enough had approached the Women's Society for a private arrangement. I'm going to pay, give me my best space. So right now they are in their room on campus listening to this lecture. Whereas because of scarcity of resources as well, many cannot afford to pay that high price for a bed space, will rather look the other way. So public ownership belongs to the state or belongs to an institution that governs everyone, while private ownership speaks to control and legal rights that belongs exclusively to an individual or to a firm. Then you can also have cooperative ownership. Cooperative, you know, is an association of people who believe in a common goal, either for profit or not for profit purposes. And if there's anything I love about cooperative society, is the fact that it is one man, one vote. One man, one vote. Irrespective of the sum that you are contributing to the purse of the cooperative society, what you have is just one vote. So prior to the development of cooperative society, we had economic philosophies that actually promoted cooperative ownership of resources. In other words, rather than me, Zainab, Bakari, or Emmanuel thinking of looking for money to buy plots of land individually just because we want to farm. What cooperative ownership preaches is that myself, Emmanuel, Zainab, and Bakari, all on this call will come together as a cooperative society. We will pool that money together, then we will go and buy a land together in the name of the cooperative society or in the name of the community, so that neither me nor Emmanuel nor Bakari nor Zainab will be able to lay claim, absolute claim of control and legal right to the land. So whatever is being produced belongs to all of us. Whatever outcome is derived from activities on that plot of land belongs to all of us. We can also have mixed ownership. And mixed ownership often considers the combination of public and private ownership. Mixed ownership focuses on the combination of public and private ownership. So far, so good, dear participants. We started with the concept of scarcity. We went to choice, and that in economics, choices are inevitable because resources available to us are relatively scarce. We have looked at the concept of resources, defined it, and provided ourselves with 4 categories of resources: natural resources, human resources, capital resources, and entrepreneurial resources. We have just concluded our discussion of ownership of resources. And we did say that your definition of ownership will remain incomplete if control and legal rights are not mentioned. Because, just as we have rightly explained, you can have control but may not be the legal bona fide. You may not be the legal, how will I call that? You may do not have the legal right to that resource. You may not have the legal right to it. Look at all our states from the southwest, Osun State, up to the north in Zamfara, where you have loads of resources, underground natural resources along that bed. You have people harnessing those resources today, but we call them illegal miners. Why? Yes, many of them have control over the little space where they mine, but do they have the legal right to mine those resources? The answer is no, because all natural resources are owned by the state, which is public ownership. Hence, if the state does not do anything about it and you go there, you saw it, and you decided to start mining those resources, yes, you control the area, but you do not have the legal right. And that is why we have so many unrest as well, characterizing places of natural resources endowment, because these stakeholders are fighting for control. They know that they do not have the legal right, but before the law comes there to say, hey, stop this mining, they are always of the view that they would have mined whatever they want to mine and run with the money. So we will be moving forward now into the concept of production possibility frontier. In economics, production possibility frontier is also known as the production possibility curve. It is also known as the production possibility boundary. And this is an important economic tool which we use particularly when resources are limited, and we expect that these limited resources be deployed for use of production purposes. So the big question on our table will be, what is production possibility frontier? The second question would be, why is production possibility frontier significant in our study of production and trade? And the third question would be, how do we use the production possibility frontier as an economic tool for analysis of choices, scarcity, and production? So, every textbook of economics, every textbook of economics, particularly microeconomics, allude to the fact that a production possibility frontier is a graph. The production possibility frontier is a graph. What kind of graph it is? It is simply a graph that shows you the maximum combination of two goods or services that an economy can produce using its available resources and technology while operating efficiently. While operating efficiently. I have bolded the key words that you need to pay attention to in this definition. Number one, it is a graph. So what it means is that every one of you must make up your mind to be able to sketch these graphs. Yes, this is an online learning stuff. I would encourage you to pick your pen and paper, sketch severally. The more you pick your pen and paper to sketch these graphs, the faster will your familiarity of this PPF increase. It shows you the maximum combinations of two goods. It can be private good, it can be public good. Some of us can use yam and beans depending on the kind of food that you like. Some can even use simple analogy, commodity S, commodity Y. But the basic assumption is that you have only two goods, commodity X and commodity Y. One will be situated along the vertical axis, that is the axis that is facing the sky. Then the other will be along the horizontal axis. That is the axis that is lying straight on the ground. And when you plot the your scatter diagram, that is the different combinations, you see it all over the places. And by the time you plot it, you insert your curve, it shows you those places where the maximum combinations can actually be achieved. The PPF suggests increasing opportunity cost, and it matters because resources are not equally efficient in the production of goods and services. And this is what our production possibility frontier looks like. How do you explain this? In economics, when you have a graph like this, it is important that you provide some explanations to it. And I'm going to guide you on how we explain our graphs. First, explain what the axis stands for. Or, as in some cases, you'll be advised to tell us, first of all, tell us the overall objective of the graph so that whoever sees it knows that this is what you're speaking to. So in my own case now, I would say that the graph above, depending on where you're writing, or the graph below, as some would do, or simply say, this graph provides the representation of the production possibility curve, production possibility frontier, or production possibility boundary, depending on the ones you want to use. Whether you use production possibility frontier, production possibility curve, or production possibility boundary, we are speaking to the same thing. So this figure is the production possibility frontier in Yaba local government area, or the production possibility frontier of Unilag Waters. Unilag Waters or Unilag Ventures produces wine, Unilag wine, and produces cotton, Unilag's cotton. And have been set up to maximize profit. So, given the demand in our community, we see oscillation in the demand for wine and the demand for cotton. So we cannot say authoritatively that we're going to stop the production of cotton and focus on wine. Nor can we stop the production of wine and focus on the production of cotton. So, after telling us that this figure is the production possibility frontier for Unilag Ventures, Unilag Ventures produces two commodities, wine and cotton. Along the vertical axis, wine is hosted, while cotton, the quantity supplied or produced of cotton, is measured along the horizontal axis. So, where are those combinations? If you can see my cursor, point A tells us the quantity of wine that we produce alongside with cotton using the available resources at our disposal. At point B, you can see, what do you notice? The quantity of wine produced has reduced, but the quantity of cotton produced has increased. Along the C, point C2, quantity of wine has reduced further, while the quantity produced for cotton has increased further. Now, you can see the variation in the combinations, but the fact that they are all seated on the production possibility frontier gives us confidence that the resources put to use for the production of these commodities along these combination lines are optimized. They are optimized. Number two, you can see that production possibility frontier reinforces our knowledge of opportunity costs, because for every unit increase in the use of one resources, there is going to be a corresponding loss in the use of an existing resources. In other words, there will always be an alternative forgone. Look, for example, I'm moving from point A to point B. For me to achieve that, I have to let go a few units of wine in order to gain more of cotton. If I also move from point B to point C, I still practice the concept of opportunity cost, because I have to let go more units of wine in order to gain more units of cotton. Beyond this, combinations that lie on the production possibility frontier A, B, and C Can you also see two other points? Please drop your comments on the chat box. Apart from point A, B, and C, I'm asking you, can you see any other points? If your answer is yes, thank you, Adewale Mercy. Thank you, Favor. Thank you, Ashake Jimo. Thank you, Ogechi. Yes. Ojuti1 says, yes, there are point X and Y. I agree with all of you. What does point X mean? And what does point Y mean? Please drop your comments. What does point X mean? What does point Y mean? Yes, point X means resources are underutilized. Okay. Point Y means the unattainable point. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, X, as you can see on the screen, symbolizes underutilization of resources. If I'm going to say it in our Nigerian language, using our own pidgin, it means we never maximize our talent. We are underutilizing our talents because what this is telling us is two things. And what are those two things? What are those two things? Number one, number one is that we have not used our resources. They're lying fallow. We have left our resources unemployed. That is what point X means. Very similar to what we are doing in Nigeria. We know that we have a young population that is growing, that is vibrant, that is full of energy. Just as you can see early this morning, I asked you a question. Is there something that you want this week that is still pending, which you have not achieved? Many of us cited money, 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 money. Of course, we are in this situation because we are on point X. We have left many resources unemployed. It is not only when humans who have energy are able to work, are looking for work, and are unable to secure a good job that we say there is unemployment. Even when resources are lying fallow, you are not using it, it is unemployment because you are underemploying that resources. Those resources could have been deployed for production purposes. That is one reason. The second reason, dear participants, is inefficiency. Inefficiency. The resource or resources have been employed. They have the work to do, but they are not doing what they are expected to do optimally. A good example is a secretary that has been employed to work in an office and gets to the office 8 a.m. And the only thing she does is sit down behind the system and be watching YouTube, watching Nigerian movies on YouTube for 2, 3 hours. And she knows that she has to work for 8 hours. She spends the first 5 hours watching movies. That is what? Inefficiency. Inefficiency. So, when you have such two characteristics, resources are underemployed, and the ones that are employed are used inefficiently, you will be seated on point X inside of the boundary, production possibility boundary. That is where you'll be residing. So anybody residing inside of the production possibility boundary, inside the production possibility boundary will be regarded as underutilization of resources. Underutilization of resources. Then the second point, as you have rightly said, is outside of the production possibility boundary. We look at it as if it is impossible to achieve it. That is another awkward way of reasoning that has characterized us as Nigerians. That thing is impossible. When we speak, we look at it and say, Abba, when you are not in the US or when you are not in the UK, it is impossible, Joe. No. These Western countries we are all admiring today, at one time or the other in their history, they were all seated inside of their production possibility boundary. But they kept trying, they kept thinking, they were creative, and they embraced innovations on how to better use the resources at their disposal efficiently to satisfy their needs. Hence, they employed the resources, used the resources, and that's why if you see anybody who goes abroad today, to pick your call is always a problem. Because when they're on the job, they don't remember their phone. Unlike us here, when you're on the job, you see you hold your phone, hello, 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 while on the job. Typical of every Nigerian, because we have no regard for time as an important resource. But over there, by fire, by force, you clock in, you clock out. And for many of us who have friends over there, or family relations over there, they will tell you they are not joking over there. They work for their money because efficiency is taken seriously over there. Even though they also practice trade-offs, they do not trade off work for leisure. We here in Nigeria, we trade off work for leisure. Even when you're on the job, you are busy playing, cracking jokes, watching Kenny Black on YouTube, laughing, ka, 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 rather than brainstorming and thinking hard on how to deliver on the job before us. So, dear participants, the concept of production possibility frontier is a very useful resource, And we must pay attention to these three key things. Production possibility frontier tells us about what to produce. What to produce. And that's why point A, B, C are very important. You must be seated on the production possibility frontier at worst. At worst. You must be seated on the production possibility frontier. And that is when you can say that your resources has been properly allocated. Number two, efficiency in production is very, very key. Efficiency in production. So when you are seated inside of your production possibility boundary, that is an indicator that you are not producing enough. You are not producing efficiently. And just as I've mentioned, two things are important there. Pay attention to resources that are underemployed and those that have been employed. How do you foster efficiency in their operations? Then number three, what is economic growth? Economic growth simply means pushing the boundaries. Push that boundary. As we often tell yourself that if you want to make a first class, what should you do? Push yourself beyond the boundary. And that means moving from point A, B, and C, push that boundary to the next level. That is when you can achieve economic growth. And to achieve that, it simply means you must increase your capacity. We are still joking in Nigeria. We know that electricity supply is an important resource on this journey of production. But what do we see? Grid collapse today, grid collapse tomorrow, grid collapse next tomorrow. Hence, we are still seated on point X. So to achieve economic growth, we must think of point Y. Look at these two diagrams, dear participants. What can you say about it? What can you say about it? These are two different types of production possibility boundaries, production possibility frontiers. Look at it. What does it mean? So, the very first one tells you that you can have a complete outward shift in the production possibility frontier. A complete outward shift in the production possibility frontier. And the outward shift implies improvement in the economy's ability to produce both goods and services as the case may be. So in the case of this curve, what we have is two goods, good X and good Y. Good Y is located along the vertical axis. Good X is located along the X axis. And two things that I can mention that is responsible for this complete outward shift in the production possibility frontier. One is advances in technology. Then the second is increase in the available resources. So you must make resources available. And just as we have said, mentioned earlier on, when we are talking about growth and development, resources is not only about the crude oil. That's the mistake we've been making in Nigeria. Resources is not just about crude oil. What about other natural resources? Enugu is sitting on huge deposits of coal that can be used to power energy production for industrialization purposes. Even before they started talking about clean energy, we were just looking at our coal, unemployed. Still, Ajakuta still is there for more than 2, 3 decades now, more than 2 decades. Lying fallow, unemployed. Look at all the refineries across the country. These are resources that could have been deployed for efficient production purposes. So, moving out of this class today, I want to believe that your perspective about resources will change. Everything around you constitutes a resource. Everything around you constitutes a resource. Up to the leaf you walk around within your compound. Some are edible, some are not, but they all have their uses. But because we do not know, we classify everything as weed. So, for us to achieve that point why we must push our production possibility boundary outward to achieve that. The second graph is referred to as a partial shift in production possibility frontier. So in this case, you can see only a part of the curve is shifting obviously along the vertical axis. What does this mean, dear participants? It simply means that there is an improvement in the production of one good, which is commodity Y, while the other goods capacity remains barely unchanged. What could be responsible for this? Advances in technology or resources focused on production of good X. And we abandon that of good, production of good Y, while we ignore good X. So there are different scenarios that plays out, and I am comfortable that your understanding of production possibility frontier and its application and its analysis has been better enriched this morning. So this morning, dear participants, we've been able to cover all that we're meant to know under production possibility frontier. We started with the concept of production. We looked at the concept of resources, the categories of resources, ownership of resources, and how this fits into our production possibility frontier. We define production possibility frontier as a graphical representation of the maximum combination of any two goods or resources that is being used for production purposes in your economy. And we believe also that this production possibility frontier is an important economic tool because it tells you when resources are underemployed, when resources are employed but are used inefficiently, and also when resources are employed and used efficiently. It also tells us about the stages of development that you can attain when you are underdeveloped, and when you can achieve economic growth, and how you can achieve economic growth. The beauty of this concept is that it fosters production. And when you produce, you have some to consume. You can also export some or the excess. So how do you deal with the excess of what is produced? Is by trading it to other areas that are in need of what you have produced. Hence, there is a need for us to consider the concept of trade. Next week, God willing, when we meet, we would look at trade, types of trade, theories of trade, that is comparative advantage theory, and how it fosters specialization in order for you to gain from trade. We would also look at the concept of terms of trade and trade restrictions. Now that Trumponomics is coming back, one of his keywords is always restrictions because he chooses to make America great again. This is the land space for capitalism where liberalization, minimal restrictions is advocated as part of the theories. But we have a Trump that believes in making America great by obstructing trade. You cannot bring in, but America can send out. So they're going to start, we're going to see different forms of trade restrictions, which we'll speak to, God willing, next week. Thank you for your participation thus far. Are there areas of concern, interest that you think that I need to clarify before we round off? So I can now restore your power to unmute. Are there areas of interest?
Oh,
Okay, so in the absence of none, we can call it a day. I will make available to us on our WhatsApp group the recorded version of this session, as well as the PDF version of these slides. For the recommended textbook that we have provided to you, unfortunately, production possibility, frontier, and trade was not discussed explicitly. But for those who have access to Samuelson, Lipsy, and Crystal, you will see it in chapter 1 of that textbook. Please avail yourself of it. And if I have the appropriate permission, I can scan the relevant pages and also share with us on our WhatsApp group. So please, till next week when we meet again, do not close down your books. Please read it over and over again, because when you, after the class, you shut down, before you know what is happening, it becomes too heavy for you to consume easily. Okay? So I look forward to having a very vibrant, exciting, and engaging live session with us next week. Please enjoy the weekend. Thank you and God bless.
thank you, sir.